Good evening, everyone. So, it's my first time actually giving a Dharma talk in Paris, so I'm very glad to come back to a city I visited quite a number of times. And I'm especially glad to address a topic tonight that is actually of importance to all of us here, and also everyone else in Paris and outside of Paris. The role of attention, the importance of attention, really cannot be overestimated. So, I have titled the talk for tonight, Cultivating Attentional Intelligence. It highlights the point that intelligence is something that we use very much as we use our intelligence, our intellectual intelligence, problem-solving ability, and so on. And we can use it poorly, and if we do, we suffer. And we can use it well, in which case we derive benefit, we find happiness. So turning to the next slide, here's a point that is familiar to all of us already, and it's very familiar to modern psychology. Attentional imbalance. So I'm describing your own experience, I imagine, the experience of all of us, in highlighting that, first of all, we've all experienced attentional laxity. We know what it's like. It's when we lose the clarity of attention. Mind becomes dull, spaced out, nebulous, sleepy. We all know what that's like. But when the mind is dulled in that fashion, it's really not good for much, except for maybe taking a nap. There's not much else. Even if we have very good intelligence, intellectual intelligence, if the attention is dull, it will be very hard for that intelligence to get through and be useful. But now, especially in our modern society, especially in great cities like Paris, we're especially familiar with the another attentional imbalance of excitation. So if we liken laxity, or see the correspondence of attentional laxity to attention deficit disorder, which is very well known in modern psychology, then excitation, agitation, corresponds to attention hyperactivity disorder. So ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, is now an endemic problem globally. It's not just the West. It's in Ulaanbaatar in Mongolia, it's Singapore, it's Beijing, it's everywhere. Human beings have had this, I think, for as long as we have been human beings, having a mind that is agitated, distracted, excited. So that's not something new. We can't blame anyone for it. But we all know, I don't need to tell you, the pace of life, living in a large city, who needs to elaborate? That the pace of life, the amount of information we need to process, the number of demands on our time, the very strong incentive to engage in multitasking, the pace of entertainment, from video games to television, advertisements, to movies and so forth, is almost as if it was designed, this whole way of life, to scatter our attention. As if we're putting our minds kind of in a centrifugal force to disperse it, to scatter it in all directions. So if you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, if you've never experienced that, you probably don't need to say it. But if this is familiar, then you may want to say it. So there's attention deficit, there's attention hyperactivity, and then there's something that is not so commonly spoken of in modern psychology. I call it attentional dysfunction, where as we're attending, we may be very stable, very focused, very clear, But the way that we are attending is dysfunctional, which is to say, in the very act of attending in that way, we are harming ourselves. So that can happen. Can you think of any examples where you're very focused, very clear, very sharp, very stable, but the sheer act of attending is already afflictive or harmful? First of all, to yourself. Secondly, very possible to others. So, if you haven't come up with examples, I'll give you a few. Especially in America, I know for a long time, now to some extent it's still true, the tobacco industry was very aggressive in marketing cigarettes to young people, teenagers, to make it look very cool. You're really, really hip. You're really attractive. You're really cool if you're smoking. And so they try to persuade young people, even before it's legal to smoke, this will make you cool. If you're not smoking, you're kind of a dope. And so, of course, it worked very well. So we have many, many teenagers smoking. Now, who gets benefit from persuading young people to smoke? Tobacco industry only. It's probably going to kill them, and in a really unpleasant way. So attending, thinking, how can we get young people to smoke cigarettes, and as many as possible? How can we do that? And looking at what teenagers look, at what teenagers want, and how they get in groups, and how they want to be inside a group. This is attending very closely, but it's afflictive. And you know you're doing something that is beneficial to you, your company, and is absolutely harmful, with no benefit whatsoever for the people you're attending to. Imagine that you would like to cheat somebody. You'd like to manipulate somebody. You would like to kill somebody. Well, you may be very focused. Right? Maybe very focused, very stable, very clear. Attention is working very well, except you're doing it to harm someone, to exploit someone, right? To cheat someone, and so forth. So we may attend very closely, but the very act of attending is already harmful. This is true in the law as well. I think it must be true here in France. I know it's true in the United States. That if you're planning to rob a bank or planning to engage in a terrorist act, you may be very focused, very, very focused, and planning very intelligently exactly how you'll do it and try to get away with it with impunity. And even if you don't succeed, you never actually commit the terrorist act. If the police catch you, you're guilty. You can go to prison, right? Conspiracy to engage in an act of terrorism or what have you. It's true, yeah. Just the intention. It's the intention is against the law. It's already an act of violence to plan a terrorist act, plan to rob a bank, plan to kill, plan to cheat. It's conspiracy. That's good. That's the way the law should be. It's not just waiting for it to happen. It's also true in Buddhist understanding. And so, how can we know whether our attention is dysfunctional, even if it's very stable and clear? For this, another type of intelligence is needed. Something that's more foundational, more basic than attentional intelligence. And I call it cognitive intelligence. Now, cognitive is, in English, not a term many people know. Psychologists do, and not many other people. But it's very simple term. And I think it must be the same in French, yeah? Connation? Something like that, yeah? So it's simply the faculty of desire and intention. The faculty of desire and intention. And that is as we pursue certain desires. Some desires are very healthy, wholesome, constructive, positive, beneficial. So if we devote ourselves to them, good. And other desires, even if we fulfill them, it will not be to our benefit, or maybe to anyone else's benefit either. But we may pursue it anyway because we're deluded. We don't know what will really make us happy. So the great Indian Buddhist Bodhisattva, living in the 8th century, Shantideva, He said, while we seek to be free of suffering, we hasten after the very causes of suffering. And while we wish to find happiness out of delusion, we destroy the causes of our own happiness as if they were our enemies. So he's highlighting another type of intelligence, that we need to be discerning in terms of choosing which desires to follow, which intentions to follow, and which to release. Now that will determine whether we are able to practice attentional intelligence and avoid this attentional dysfunction. So, brief introduction. And you see, this issue of attention is enormously important for everyone. Religious people, non-religious people, meditators, non-meditators, everyone. Young people, old people, retired people, working people. In fact, it will be very hard to live a happy and meaningful life if attentional intelligence is very poor. And so, we all know about ADHD. I think it's now prevalent throughout Europe. We know it so well. So we move to the next slide, and we see how is the medical establishment dealing with ADHD in this modern world of ours. I've not studied medical treatment here in France, but I suspect it's rather similar to that in the United States, and I know what's happening there. Especially if you have a child, it could be an adult. If you have a child who's showing symptoms of ADHD, the parents are probably parents or school teachers, maybe in combination. They'll probably take the child to a psychiatrist and say this child seems to be exhibiting strong symptoms, attention deficit, hyperactivity, maybe both. And in all likelihood, the doctor, if he or she recognizes, yes, these are very clear symptoms of ADHD, then the doctor will prescribe a drug. Probably just that. As if ADHD is simply a neurological dysfunction, and therefore give them a drug. Now the drugs are, the primary drugs, in America at least, are Ritalin and Adderall, and they're now used by millions of children and adolescents. That's the primary intervention. It has an effect on the brain somewhat similar to cocaine. And that's by and large what young people get if they have ADHD. And the person making the decision is their parents. Of course. A 7-year-old, an 8-year-old making a decision? I don't think so. The parents will say, just say yes. You have a psychological problem? Here's the solution. It's not your fault. You're not in any way responsible. Just take the drug. How long? Don't ask. That's what we're teaching our children. Just take the drug. No responsibility, nothing you can do. Just take the drug. Well, if the drugs worked, might not be so bad. But now here's from an article in the Journal of the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, scientific study, and the conclusion of this study, very important, very widely read study, is that while most young people with ADHD benefit from medications in the first year, these effects generally wane or subside by the third year or if not sooner. And for many young people, the drugs don't work at all. So they either don't work at all, or they work in suppressing the symptoms for a year, 2 years, 3 years, and then not. So then what do? You still have ADHD because it never got to the problem, the source of the problem. Now the drug doesn't work, so now you have good reason to be depressed. And then you can get another drug for that. And so the author of this paper, James Swanson, said, and I quote, "There are no long-term lasting benefits from taking ADHD medications. But mindfulness seems to be training the same areas of the brain that have reduced activity in ADHD. That's why mindfulness might be so important. It seems to get at the causes. So this is not some Buddhist saying, "Hey, Buddhism." It's a psychiatrist addressing this issue and recognizing that drugs do not address the underlying issue at all. They're simply smothering the symptom. They call it managing the symptom. Whereas mindfulness, mental training, works at least as well in how do you say, altering brain function, but it actually can work to get to the root of the problem. So that's how important this is. Now, I founded the Santa Barbara Institute for Consciousness Studies 12 years ago. The first speaker we had, the first public speaker we had, was an expert on ADHD in research. She was a geneticist. She knew the genetic influences on ADHD, and her children had ADHD, so she had a personal and professional interest in this. And she pointed out that if you're going to treat ADHD effectively, then you need to take not only the child but the environment into account. And she was very keen on mindfulness and actually conducted the first scientific study on the benefits of mindfulness for ADHD. Now, with a simple genetic test, you can determine whether a child has a genetic proclivity or tendency for ADHD. And genetics definitely plays an influence. But you may know the genetic imprint or trait before there are any symptoms in the child of ADHD. So I think we all know the best medicine is preventative, right? Rather than waiting till the problem is there, the most intelligent thing to do for all children, as we give children inoculations, right? Before they get the disease, so they never get the disease. What I think I'm about to say is utterly sensible and almost nowhere practiced. And that is young children, 4, 5, 6 years old, should already be given mental inoculations to prevent them from ever having ADHD. Because even if you have a genetic predisposition for getting ADHD, you don't need to get it. That depends on behavior, environment. It's not predestination. And I've spoken with some world experts, and they insist for this kind of situation, genetics is not predeterminism. It shows a likelihood. But the mere fact of having a likelihood doesn't necessarily mean you will have ADHD. So, training of attention, training in mindfulness, should be something that all children receive. Isn't that true? So they don't get ADHD, or if they have ADHD, change their behavior, change the way they use their minds, develop their attention skills, and then free them up. So, this is then therefore relevant to everybody who has attention at all. And then why stop? But we'll get to that. But why stop? It's simply having ordinary attention, if attention could actually be trained to exceptional levels. Now, the meditative training of attention entails the cultivation of what psychologists call cognitive control. So this is straight from psychology. We'll get to Buddhism soon. So here's how psychologists define cognitive control. It's the ability to delay gratification. So you don't just immediately go for anything that might give you some pleasure. The delay of gratification. And the next slide, I hope. Yes, cognitive control. The delay of the impulse management. We have all kinds of impulses, but can you manage them? Can you be aware of them and not simply follow every impulse you have? The cultivation of emotional self-regulation, or self-control. The suppression of irrelevant thoughts, so that you're not simply carried away by every distracting thought, every rumination, but actually you can turn your attention away, and then cultivating the ability to pay attention or learn how to be ready, to be attentive, ready to attend. So this is cognitive control. It's kind of learning how to drive. You get behind the steering wheel, there's the accelerator, the clutch, the brake. You need to learn how to drive. So I'm sure it's the same here in France. If you have a 15-year-old, you don't just say, you want to drive? Go for it. And just let them get out on the street with no training. Right? Nobody does that. I mean, not in Paris, I'm sure. You have to have some training and a license, correct? It's sensible, because a car is a lethal machine. You can kill people with it very easily. Many people. Right? And so, before you can drive, you need to have training and get a license. Unfortunately, we never had any training manual for the mind. We're all born with a mind, and we use it with no training. And then you ask, which is more dangerous, the human mind or a car? And clearly, the human mind is immeasurably more dangerous than a car. But we can use a mind with no training and with no license. That's dangerous. So this cognitive control, enormously important in psychology, is that this singular mental ability, those who are able to manifest or exhibit cognitive control, this ability predicts success both in school and in work life. So you do tests on children, on adolescents, those who have more control, more and less cognitive control. And those who have more, you're looking at success. Those who have less success. And that's true not only for business, but it's also for really leading a happy and meaningful life. It's important everywhere. So, psychologically, they found that cognitive control, just naturally, as we're growing up and the brain develops, increases from about the age of 4 to 12 years old. And then it flattens out. So when you hit 12, that's as good as it gets, if you have no training. And of course, children get no training, unless your school system is very different than America. No training in that which is so important for future success, for emotional well-being, happiness, good interpersonal relationships, and we let the children just stagnate at the age of 12. It's very strange. It makes no sense. So bolstering this ability, this ability of cognitive control, might be particularly helpful in treating ADHD. That makes sense. And again, so far we're not talking anything about Buddhism. This is just true, and importantly true. So for the next slide, please. I'm going to quote one of my intellectual heroes from the West a number of times tonight. And this is William James, one of the great pioneers of American psychology in the late 19th century. In America, he was the prominent figure. In Europe, Wilhelm Wundt in Leipzig was very prominent, of really starting experimental psychology, the experimental scientific study of the mind. William James was at Harvard, very, very eminent, quite renowned in his time. And frankly, in many ways, I think he was far ahead of his time, maybe a century ahead of his time, because so many of his insights seem to have been forgotten. But he had much to say about attention, and much of it, I think, is very brilliant. Here's the first point. We could spend a whole evening on this one slide. We won't, but we could, easily. And that is, if we ask the question, what kind of a world do you think you're living in? Are you a materialist? Do you think everything that exists consists only of matter, energy, space, time, and their emergent properties and qualities? Are you a materialist? Or do you believe that everything happens because of God's will? Do you think you're surrounded by basically good people? Or basically kind of mean-spirited, egotistical, greedy people? What kind of a person do you think you are? Good person? Bad person? Noble? Crude? What kind of a person are you? So just generally, our world has an enormous impact on our lives and how we engage with the world around us. What kind of a world do you think you're living in? Well, William James draws a very powerful parallel between attention and our worldview. And now I'll quote him, and you have, I think, you will have a very good translation in French right here. But I'll read it in English. The subjects as in some object or something you're attending to, phenomena. The subjects adhere to, that is, that we really closely attend to, become real subjects. That is, for us, they become real. They seem to be real. Attributes adhere to real attributes. Existence adhere to real existence. While the subjects disregarded become imaginary subjects, the attributes disregarded, erroneous attributes, and the existence disregarded, an existence in no man's land, in the limbo where footless fancies dwell. Habitually and practically, we do not count these disregarded things as existence at all. They're not even treated as appearances. They're treated as if they were mere waste, equivalent to nothing at all. He's of course not saying that if you don't attend to something, it doesn't exist at all. That's silly. He's not a silly man. But what do we count? What do we regard as being existent, as being real, as important? Precisely what we're attending to. Precisely. So if we look at this historically, for the last 400 years, since the time of Galileo, the scientific tradition, for which I have very deep respect, has excelled magnificently in attending to objective reality, physical reality, quantifiable reality. That's what Galileo did. And therefore, when scientists speak of evidence, they almost invariably refer to physical evidence. If it's not physical evidence, it's not evidence. If it's not physical, it's not real. Why? Because that's what they've been attending to. That's not a bad thing, but that's what science is good at. All the technology, from microscopes, telescopes, X-rays, and so forth, all of the marvelous technology, systems of measurement that scientists have devised, scientists, engineers, technologists, have devised over the last 400 years, all of it has been designed to measure physical, objective, quantifiable phenomena. So therefore, you will find scientists, I've encountered them, that will say simply, if it's not physical, it's not real. Now, is there anything that we know to be real that is not physical? Or is that merely a metaphysical belief or a religious belief? So can you think of anything for which you're totally certain it exists, but it's not physical, it has no physical attributes? Can you think of any? Well, let's take one that's easy. Information. Information. Semantic, that is, meaningful information. Now, nobody can deny that it exists. We're living in the information age, right? 19th century, much of the 20th century, okay, the mechanical age, right? But now we all know, with the internet, with computers, and so forth, living in the age of information. So right now, what's coming out of my mouth that is physically measurable? Literally hot air. With certain frequencies. Right? Certain frequencies. Ripples in the atmosphere. That's what you can measure physically. Is the breath coming out hotter than the breath going in? Are there ripples in the atmosphere that are coming from my mouth? That's what's happening physically. And then these ripples in the atmosphere are striking your eardrum, and they are also setting up then neurophysiological consequences inside your brain, specifically in the auditory cortices. That's physical. But that's not information. Information is not physical. It has no mass, no weight, doesn't even really have location. It has no physical attributes at all. But does anybody doubt that the transference of information is real and that it has causal efficacy? Can anybody seriously doubt that ideas, for example, ideas also have no mass, they have no physical attributes whatsoever? This morning I was a good tourist. I went, my friend Philippe took me to the Eiffel Tower. That was a lot of work. I was actually quite impressed when I saw how big it is. I haven't seen it for some years. Whoa, that's big. Where did that come from? Somebody had an idea. No idea No Eiffel Tower. Now clearly there's a lot of metal there, of course. But if there's no idea, there's no Eiffel Tower. And that's true for the rest of Paris. Everything that is man-made, all of our technology, it's an idea that gives rise to it. Ideas are not physical. All of our subjective experience, our emotions, desires, thoughts, memories, perceptions, dreams, all of these have no physical attributes at all, and they cannot be measured with any scientific instrument. The neurocorrelates? Yes. Behavioral expression? Yes. But right now I'm visualizing a certain type of flower, and I know what it is. I know the flower that's coming to mind. There is no scientific instrument that can observe, detect, or measure the flower that I see mentally. Does that flower not exist? The flower that you imagine yourself. Imagine the flower. How can the flower come to mind? Does that flower exist or not? How can you possibly say it doesn't exist? You're imagining it. You can imagine a flower, can't you? A whole bouquet. Does that imagined, that mental image of the flower, does it have causal efficacy? Sure. You can imagine a beautiful bouquet of flowers. Make you happy. You can imagine dead flowers. You can be a little bit sad. These are all non-physical. But if all you're focusing on is the physical, only the physical will appear to you to be real. We could spend the whole evening on it. If, as you attend to yourself, your behavior, your thoughts, your desires, your emotions, if what you're really especially focusing on is the negative ones, your failures, your defects, your errors, mistakes, unpleasant qualities, if that's what you focus on, you will have low self-esteem. Guaranteed. Guaranteed. If you're focusing on somebody else and you're doing the same thing, or a group, Muslims, Christians, people of this party, this politician, that politician, if all you ever focus on is a negative quality, they will appear to you to be only negative. And likewise, if we have some sexual infatuation with someone, infatuation of any kind, and we just focus on the positive qualities, they're the only ones that are real for us. It's not that they're the only ones real, but they're the only ones that we count as real. In other words, what we're intending to defines the reality that we feel we're living in. And that reality may be quite fictitious. Because we can also attend to things that don't exist. It's true, isn't it? We can attend to things that don't exist, that we only imagine to be true. Right? It's very powerful, this insight. He sums it up by saying each of us literally chooses, by his way of attending to things, what sort of a universe he shall appear to himself to inhabit. That's how important attention is. Who do you think you are? Who do you think the people around you are? What kind of people are they? What kind of a city is Paris? What kind of a country is France? What is human nature? What's the world at large? And all of your answers will be the exact expression of what you've been attending to. And people attend to very differently. And therefore they seem to each other to be inhabiting different worlds. I try to imagine on occasion what the members of ISIS, how they viewed the world. Because it's hard to imagine. It's hard to imagine. For me, it's hard to imagine. It seems like there must be some mutant species. Some of the things they do, if there's Boko Haram, some of the things they do, it's like, you're just not like me at all. It's easy to think. You are just not human. People like me are human. But people who do that, you're not human. Because I can't imagine how you can be human. Right? But they are. And in their worldview, what they're doing makes sense. Right? In their view, they think they're doing the right thing. That's why people are joining ISIS from France, from America, from all over the Near East. They think it's the right thing to do. Why? Are they all just crazy? Or demented? Psychotic? Or are they attending to aspects of reality we're not attending to? Are they attending to unreality, fictions that we're not attending to? We'll not understand them. I think we need to understand them. They're part of our world. We'll not understand them unless we understand what are they attending to. To simply say they're crazy or evil is not helpful. It doesn't illuminate. So, William James summed this up even more succinctly by stating, for the moment, what we attend to is reality. From moment to moment, that which counts, that which we regard as real, that's what we call reality. And that which we don't attend to, for us, doesn't exist. So for the materialist, anything is not material, just doesn't exist. Not too long ago in the New York Times, there was an article published by a very distinguished neuroscientist by the name of Michael Graziano. The title of his paper was, "Does consciousness really exist?" And his answer was no. And why? Because it has no physical attributes. And thereby, he's actually refuting his own consciousness. He's refuting the consciousness of the people who are reading his essay. If you can read his essay, you refuted his essay. If you've understood it, you refuted it. But the editors of New York Times thought it was worth to publish, and they didn't put it in the psychotic category. But rather, this is a scientist giving a plausible theory that they are testing. Maybe we're not conscious at all. It looks like they're crazy, but they're not crazy. They're just not attending to anything that's not physical. In fact, there are some major philosophers of mind, like John Searle. This is introspection, our ability to observe our own thoughts, emotions, desires, mental images, does not exist. Can you imagine that? You never introspect. You're never aware of your own thoughts and emotions. You don't know right now whether you're happy or sad, bored or interested, agitated or calm. Can you imagine that? And I debated with him. He's not unintelligent, but he does seem to have a drastically impaired ability to be aware of his own thoughts. So I think much of modern philosophy of mind and psychology is led by people who are metacognitively impaired. It would be like having a whole school of art that's run by people who are colorblind. And they'll write books about the Sistine Chapel and proclaim how beautiful the shades of gray. And they'll come to Notre Dame and look at those wonderful black and white stained glass windows and describe how fine they are. And if you can see colors, you think, you're crazy, right? No, you're just colorblind. But you don't know you're colorblind. Attention turns out to be interesting, isn't it? Let's go on. Let's see what else there is. We're not finished. So we go to the next slide. Oh, education. What's more important than education? It's a very important truism that the future belongs to the youth. We've always known that. And as a person who is now a senior citizen, I'm a senior citizen, I feel very bad, frankly, about what my generation, my parents' generation, has done to the world that younger people get to inherit. My grandson is absolutely not responsible for anything happening in the world at large. He's 10 years old, so he hasn't done much. But my generation, the next younger generation, older generation, we have created the world that children are now born into. We created this. And I think we can all agree this is a tough world to visualize. It's many, many points. Economically, environmentally, socially, morally. It's not easy. It can be hard for young people to really flourish in this world. So I think we, all of us here, there are no children here that I can see, my sense is we have a moral responsibility to do everything we possibly can for young people to prepare them to be able to cope with the world we've created for them. They didn't do it, we did it. I think it was much easier for me to grow up in the 1950s than it is to grow up in this decade. So education. Education. Not all children go to church or synagogue or temple. But in Europe, at least, most children, almost all, get some education. Right? So that's the way we can reach the young people. And so here's what William James wrote more than a century ago. He said, the faculty of voluntarily bringing back a wandering attention over and over again is the very root of judgment, character, and will. An education which should improve this faculty would be the education par excellence. But it is easier to define this ideal than to give practical instructions for bringing it about. I think it's an enormously important and true statement. That ability to really maintain focus, the very root of judgment, character, and will. So he's suggesting here that if there were an education system that taught children how to develop their attention skills, to develop attentional stability instead of attention hyperactivity, attentional clarity instead of attentional deficit, and learn how to focus intelligently in ways that are truly beneficial to themselves and others, well, that would be the best education possible. And I often think that even if you had an absolutely brilliant teacher at any level of education, just imagine a brilliant elementary school teacher, or high school, secondary school, university. Even if the professor is absolutely brilliant in every way, intelligence, empathy, compassion, just the perfect teacher, right? If children can't pay attention, then it's like going to a gourmet restaurant with your lips sewn shut, right? They can't listen. If they can't listen, they can't receive. If they can't receive, they're not getting an education. So the education is being given, and they're not receiving it. Not because they don't want to, but because they can't. Because their attention is either so dull or so scattered, they can't receive what is given. So I am persuaded an enormous amount of education is wasted with the best of intentions by very well trained teachers, because the children are not able to receive what is being given. Years ago, when I was at Stanford University as a graduate student, I was in religious studies, but I went to the School of Education, which is a very good one. And I spoke with a senior professor named McDermott. McDermott comes from quite an illustrious family. And I think his name was Ray McDermott. In any case, I spoke with him because I was doing my dissertation on attention. And I asked him to share experience because he was a researcher. He spent a lot of time in middle school, studying classrooms with 13, 14, 15-year-old students. He's not a Buddhist, not a meditator, very good professor, researcher. And he said for that age group, for middle school, 90% of the time in the classroom, the teacher's main challenge is to get the children to pay attention. That means you have 10% of the time to actually teach them something. And the rest of the time, you're just trying to corral. In other words, the damage is already done. That's a lot of wasted time. So in education, William James continues, the power of voluntarily attending is the whole point of the procedure. The point of the whole procedure. It's voluntarily attention. Whether you're working on problem solving, you're writing, you're reading, you're listening, you're doing mathematics, you're doing creative work, the whole point is to really focus. If you can't, everything else fails. Just as a balance turns on its knife edges, so upon it our moral destiny turns. So he's really highlighting enormously the importance of attention. But he says our whole moral destiny. Take an example. We all, I think, have been tempted to do things that we know are not wise, are not good, not beneficial in the long term, but we really like to anyway, for immediate gratification. It could be just eating too much dessert. Not evil, but more weight. Or it could be something we know to be really wrong. Like adultery. Maybe you find another person's spouse very attractive. Maybe I could get her. But then, of course, how much suffering does that create? In her relationship with her husband, if I succeed, in her husband, with her children, her family, for me, if I'm married, my spouse, how much collateral damage from invading another person's marriage? Right? But it would be fun. We like sex. And so one may be tempted. So let's take that one. That's kind of serious. Because the potential for a lot of suffering, but also some pleasure. So we're tempted. Well, William James' point here is, if we keep on focusing on that person who is the object of our sexual desire, keep on focusing and thinking and imagining, and then planning, and thinking more, and focusing, we'll probably go for it. Whereas if we can just get our attention off and focus on something else, anything else, that will fade away. We're not going to pursue something that we're not attending to. If we stop thinking about that person as a sexual object, as a conquest, we won't go for it. So, to what extent when we're tempted to do things we know are wrong? Not somebody else tells us, but we know. If we can just get attention off, we win. And if we can't, we'll almost certainly lose. It's only a matter of time. So attention and ethics, big relationship. So let's go to the next slide. Still not finished. Maybe a bit more William James to come. You see, he was quite brilliant. This was more than a century ago, which means hardly anybody reads him anymore. Attention and inner strength. This is about character building. And he writes, a person who has daily inured himself to habits of concentrated attention, energetic volition, and self-denial in unnecessary things, or worthless, meaningless things. Such a person, who has that type of mental training, will stand like a tower when everything rocks around him, and his softer fellow mortals are winnowed like chaff in the blast. So you never want to paraphrase William James. He says it better than you will. His prose is marvelous. Well, that's true. I think it's really, really true. But it does take discipline, it takes training. But in times of adversity, what happens? When some calamity, like an earthquake, or some other natural calamity, or a terrorist act, or a tragedy, a death in the family, or violence, adversity. What happens when great adversity strikes? People tend to become very agitated, lose control of their attention. They start speculating, imagining, freaking out, not thinking clearly, a lot of impulses coming up, a lot of emotional reactivity coming up, and they can really do crazy things. We've seen this throughout human history, right? Mob mentality. There's people freaking out together in the same way. People can simply become terrified when big calamity strikes. And then who holds them together? People who stand like a rock, who are still together, composed, stable, clear, grounded. They're the leaders. And with no leaders, everybody just goes crazy. Right? So this is it. Attention turns out again to be enormously important. Go to the next slide. Maybe one more William James. Who raises an enormously important question. And that is, some things are trainable and some things are not. Right? If you'd like to be taller, if you'd like to be taller, you can stretch, you can do all kinds of exercises. It's not going to happen. Right? So some things, they're just locked in, it's hardwired. Right? So when it comes to the mind, and then specifically attention, can it be trained or not? It's a simple question. William James addressed this about 125 years ago. Can attention be trained? First of all, he says there is no such thing as voluntary attention sustained for more than a few seconds at a time. Anybody who's just begun to meditate, you probably agree with it. What is called sustained voluntary attention is a repetition of successive efforts which bring back the topic to the mind. In other words, when we maintain a continuity of attention, it's not really a continuity of attention. It's continuing, it's continuity and then break, and then bring it back, continuity and break, bring it back, break, bring it back. It's interrupted. That's what we call continuous attention. It's actually discontinuous attention. I think he's right. He's right. But then he continues. He said the possession of such a steady faculty of attention is unquestionably a great boon. People are composed, collected, focused, unified mind, and they can sustain that. They are efficient, productive. They can really get the job done. So no question, it's a great boon. Those who have it can work more rapidly and with less nervous wear and tear. But then, I'm inclined to think that no one who is without it naturally can by any amount of drill or discipline attain it in a very high degree. Its amount is probably a fixed characteristic of the individual. In other words, hopeless. If you're not already very focused, if you weren't born that way, too bad. Some people are short, some people are tall. That's the way it is. Some people have it, some people don't. Now, why would he make a statement like this? In Western intellectual history, I've studied it a fair amount, he's one of the least dogmatic people I've ever encountered in his writings. He wasn't a Christian, so he wasn't a Christian dogmatist. But he wasn't anti-religion, so he was not a materialist, not an atheist. He was a radical empiricist, which means he was very, very open to data, to evidence. So I can't say with certainty how he drew this conclusion, but I can speculate in a very informed way. I think he looked around. He traveled extensively, he spent a lot of time in France, in Germany, in England, fluent in German, fluent in French, traveled fairly extensively in the United States, so he really got around. He didn't get to Asia, though. He was totally a Western creature. And I think in all of his travels, and he met many people, I think he simply saw no evidence of anybody rigorously training the attention and clearly improving the attention to a very significant degree. And he's an empiricist. Therefore, if you see no evidence, you see, well, it seems to me attention can't be trained. Now, what he didn't consider is while Eurocentric civilization, that's Europe, America, Australia, and so on, at that time had no methods whatsoever for training attention. That doesn't mean that nobody had any methods for training attention. If he'd gone to Thailand and gone to any monastery at all where people are meditating, he would have seen the training of attention is very prominent. If he went to any Hindu ashram where they're meditating, he'd find they're cultivating samadhi. If he went to Tibet, Japan, Korea, Cambodia, Japan, etc., he'd find people are training attention all over the place and doing it in many ways very, very well. But like many Westerners of that time, he was very ethnocentric. He didn't really seriously consider that any civilization outside of Western civilization had discovered anything about the mind that was worthwhile. I think we have to forgive him. He lived in the late 19th century. It was the peak of the British Empire, the French Empire. America had some empire. The West dominated. And we're very ethnocentric. That was just true for the whole culture. Like the American, European conquest of Native Americans, just regarded them as animals. Best Indian is a dead Indian. Slaves, common. Not it, well, when William James was born, they still had slaves. So that's how we treated people who are not like us. They're either worthless, or we should just put them to work as slaves. So I admire him, and I forgive him for making such an ignorant statement. He didn't know anything. And he didn't travel. It was hard to get around in 1890. No airplanes. So that means boats. That's a long boat to India. To Southeast Asia, that's a long boat. He didn't do it. Europe, yes. Asia, no. So he commented there at the latter part of the 19th century that psychology indeed is today hardly more than what physics was before Galileo, what chemistry was before Lavoisier. He recognized that it was in a very primitive state. And he also recognized that Galileo really began the scientific revolution by developing the appropriate technology, but making very sophisticated, rigorous observations of the phenomena he was seeking to understand. Galileo was interested in the sun and the moon, the planets. He developed a telescope. He was interested to know whether balls rolling down a ramp went at constant velocity or accelerated. Interested to know whether a big heavy object fell faster than a light object. Tower of Pisa, he actually dropped balls. So he had the appropriate technology. What psychology lacked at his time, William James's time, and still lacks, almost to the same extent, is any sophisticated, rigorous means of observing mental phenomena. Neuroscience is fantastic for observing the neural correlates of subjective experience. And behavioral psychology, cognitive psychology, very good for observing the behavioral expressions of mental processes. But I think you could check every university in France and every psychology department in all of France. I don't know this, but I think it's true. You'll not find one department in which psychology students are trained rigorously in introspection. And that's the only way we have to observe mental events. Unless you're clairvoyant, and you can see somebody else's thoughts. So that's a very bizarre science. But it's not a limitation that Buddhism has suffered from, ever. So this brings us out of Western civilization to the next slide, where to my mind what William James has written is brilliant and important, at least as important now as it was 125 years ago when he wrote it. Everything he said. What I find remarkable is that during the 20th century, which is the great century for the rise of cognitive science, science of the mind, many studies were done of attention. By neuropsychologists, by neuroscientists, psychologists, many studies. You know what they didn't study? Is whether attention is trainable. They didn't study. They didn't ask the question. He told them this is really important. And he said, as far as I can tell, attention isn't trainable. They ignored the question for the next century. These are scientists who are supposed to be curious. The most important thing about attention is, can it be trained or not? And they didn't even ask the question. They just treat it as if, whatever. So literally, I've studied, I've worked with people in the field. It's only in this century, only the last 10, 15 years, that some reputable scientific studies have been done to determine whether attention can be trained. And the answer is, yes. They're just starting the study, and immediately they find they give people 20 minutes of training for 6 weeks, and yes, attention can be trained. William James is wrong. And that's still ignoring the 4,000-year history in India of developing attention. So ethnocentricity is still very alive and well in modern academia. Still treating other civilizations as if they actually don't know anything at all. Not about what's important, like the mind. Well, happily we are not the only civilization on the planet. And India, where I've lived about 6 years myself, is really India is like the mother of samadhi. Of all civilizations, Chinese, Indian, Mayan, Greek, Roman, Jewish, so forth. Of all the world civilizations throughout recorded history. I think it's an empirical fact, an objective fact, that India, more than any other civilization, has excelled in developing attention skills. They have a term for it, samadhi, highly focused attention. And they've been working at it for easily 4,000 years. Easily. When the Buddha appeared 2,500 years ago, the practice, development, achievement of samadhi was ancient history. They already knew about it for centuries and centuries. It was already a very highly developed discipline. If you read the life story of the Buddha, the first thing he did when he left his palace and went out in the pursuit of liberation, the first thing he did was developing samadhi. And he sought out one and then two accomplished masters of samadhi. He trained them. He was a prodigy and very quickly achieved their extremely highly states of very focused, stable, clear attention. But he found that that alone was not sufficient for achieving liberation, so then he continued on. So, the Buddha's great innovation was to not, when he actually, after he spent 6 years in austerities of a wide variety, many types of training, he came back to samadhi. And so let's try it again. But let's take a different approach. Because at the time of the Buddha, those great adepts of samadhi, like his two teachers, had regarded samadhi as an end in itself. If you achieve highly focused, very highly advanced stages of samadhi, single-pointed attention, you can enter into states of bliss, complete withdrawal from the phenomenal world, states of profound equanimity. And there are many great yogis who considered when you achieve that, that's as good as it gets. That's moksha, that's liberation, that's freedom. Complete withdrawal from the world into inner states of bliss, equanimity, peace that surpasses the understanding. But young Gautama at the age of 29 recognized, yeah, what about when you come out of samadhi? And once again you're engaging with this messy world. And he saw, no, it didn't bring about any irreversible change, not freedom. It was more like an anesthetic. It removes you from the difficulties of the world, but it doesn't free you from the afflictions of the mind. So what the Buddha introduced into Indian culture, one of his great revolutionary discoveries, was the union of samadhi, or specifically it's called shamatha, which is really highly focused attention also, and vipassana, which is insight. And that is, he highly focused his attention, and then with that highly focused attention, he explored the nature of mind, explored consciousness, explored the relationship between the mind and the rest of the world. He did something innovative. It was similar in some ways to what Galileo did. Galileo did not invent the telescope. It had been invented already in Holland. Knowing how to polish the lenses, to mount the lenses, they already knew how. But the Dutch had never used the telescope in a scientific fashion. They just took it as, for what it was. Oh, isn't this interesting? We can look through things and magnify. But Galileo refined the telescope beyond what it had been, and then he used it for the first time in a scientific fashion. And he made discoveries that no one had ever made. The craters on the moon, the moons of Jupiter, sunspots, and what he made one discovery that led to the death of the widespread belief that the Earth is the center of the universe. One discovery. It was empirical. He saw something. He saw the phases of Venus. He saw the phases of Venus, like the phases of the moon. Venus also has phases. And if Venus has phases, then it cannot be going around planet Earth. It doesn't work. Ptolemy was wrong. So a belief that was almost universally held throughout Europe for about 1400 years. One observation killed it. Ptolemy was wrong. Copernicus was right. He used the technology of a telescope in a scientific fashion. The telescope was shamatha, and his careful observations were vipassana. And he started the scientific revolution. Galileo started a contemplative revolution in India by taking the pre-existing technology of samadhi and then using the samadhi like a telescope to investigate nature. Enormous impact. It was perhaps his greatest discovery. Tsongkhapa, the great Tibetan master, said, this is the essence of Buddhist meditation, shamatha and vipassana. That's it. There are many others, but they're all derivative of the core, shamatha and vipassana. And the Buddha said of this that the mind that is established in equipoise, the mind that is free of ADHD, mind free of laxity, free of excitation, and not dysfunctional, such a mind comes to know reality as it is. So it's a wonderful thing that Western civilization is not the only civilization on the planet. And we're only beginning to discover it. I have spent a lot of time in Western academia. It's not widely accepted that Tibetans, Indians, and so forth have actually made discoveries about reality that Westerners haven't. Not widely accepted. In fact, there's a book called The Discoverers. Big fat book. It's the history of humanity's discoveries over the last 5,000 years. The Discoverers. I don't know whether it's translated into French. Like Daniel Boorstin. Very eminent historian. Very erudite. And he traces the discoveries of the ancient Chinese and the ancient Indians and the Babylonians and the Mayans and then the Greeks and the Romans and the Jews and the Germans and the English and the Americans and the French and so on. He writes a big book about the history of humanity's discoveries of all kinds, of continents and atoms, everywhere. So when I was reading this book years ago, I got very curious. How many chapters do you have devoted to discoveries relating to the mind in a book about 500 pages long? How many chapters? None. Okay, how many pages? 2. How many people made important discoveries about the nature of mind in all of human history? 2. Where were they from? China? India? Tibet? Ancient? Socrates? Shankara? No, Freud and Jung. They are the only 2 people mentioning in all of human history who made important discoveries about the human mind. This I find ridiculously ethnocentric. As if Indians never discovered anything in 4,000 years. And they were the ones that developed samadhi. And the West has always been impoverished for samadhi. It's never been our strength. It's not the strength of the Jewish tradition, or the Greeks, or the Romans, or Europe. It's just never been our strength. We've never been very good at it. The Indians have been good at it for 4,000 years. And they don't even get a mention. So I find that interesting. And that was written only 10, 20 years ago. So now let's get, so what did the Buddhists discover? And it's not only the Buddhists, the Hindus, the Taoists also have now very good methods. But I'll focus on what I know most about, and that is Buddhist methods for developing attentional intelligence. If you want to train your attention, the first thing, especially for us living here in the 21st century, and especially for those living in the 21st century in cities, first thing you need to learn how to do is work. And it's not easy. It's not something you master in a couple of minutes. Because we have, all of us here, we've been around, even younger ones here, we've been around for some decades. We have decades of habituation, of settling into an energetic mode of fight and flight, giving rise to a lot of anxiety, nervousness, agitation. We all know this. The first thing is to unwind, relax. And that has to be learned as a skill. It doesn't come naturally. If you spent the last 30 years as a nomad living in eastern Tibet, and what you do day after day, month after month, is watch yaks, because there's not much else happening, then you probably don't need to learn how to relax. You got that one. But imagine a person who spent the first 30 years of his life living out as a nomad, watching yaks, and your first 30 years. You may as well be different species. So we actually need to learn how to relax, and then learn it deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. On the basis of relaxation, then we need to develop a second quality, and that's stability. Stability, composure, grounded, centeredness, the ability to focus and stay focused without falling into attention hyperactivity. What William James called sustained voluntary attention. But that has to be coming from a place of looseness, of ease, relaxation, and not just getting tighter and tighter and tighter. Has to. Otherwise you'll burn out. I know it. You'll burn out, you'll get super tense, and they say, the hell with meditation. It just makes me so tight I can't stand it. I'm so frustrated I can't stand it. I suck at meditation. I never want to do it again. Because it makes me so frustrated. Because I'm so terrible at it. Insofar as you've developed relaxation and stability, then you can go on and cultivate a third and a very important quality, and that is vividness, clarity, brightness, acuity, sharpness. Might be very clear. And generally they should be cultivated in that sequence. First relaxation. Out of relaxation, stability. Out of stability, vividness. That's it. That's the key. A lot of people, even meditators, Buddhists, Hindus, others, skip relaxation. A lot of studies have been done by psychologists of people who have very good attention skills, have to have very good attention skills. Air traffic controllers. You really don't want air traffic controllers to have a wandering mind. Jet fighter pilots, they'll crash. Professional chess players, they'll lose. Professional musicians, they'll lose their jobs. And so on. And scientific studies have shown that when such people, whose occupations require very focused and sustained attention, that when they do that, whether it's something very gentle like playing music, or not so gentle, like flying a jet fighter plane in battle, the longer you stay focused, the tighter you become, and the more exhausted you become. And I think if you think about it, you all know that's true. Try driving in very dense, heavy traffic. Stop and go for 2 hours, where you have to be focused, And when you get to your destination, how do you feel? So that's because we haven't learned how to relax. We do know how to focus. If I say, if you don't focus now, I'll beat you. I'll hit you with a stick. Focus now, or you get punished. Well, if you take me seriously, you will. Okay? Okay? No. Okay. You'll lie down and take a nap at the end. Whereas I lived with one yogi who meditated towards the end of his life. He's passed away. Towards the end of his life, he was meditating from 5 o'clock in the morning until 1 o'clock in the morning. And never stressed out. He had achieved very good samadhi. And he was always relaxed. That's the difference. So, that's it. It's very simple. Relaxation, stability, and vividness. If you skip any of those, you skip something enormously important. Next slide. How do we do it? That's what we'd like to achieve. And if we consider And consider any activity that you find meaningful. Even falling asleep, that's meaningful. Getting a good night's sleep, it's important. Engaging with children, work, and so forth. How will it go better if you're uptight, agitated, and dull, or you're relaxed, stable, and clear? It doesn't take any time at all to figure that out. Then why isn't this being taught in every school in France, in Europe, on the planet? Because everything goes better if you're relaxed, stable, and clear. And everything goes worse if you're uptight, agitated, and dull. So I really am astounded. William James wrote about the importance of attention more than 100 years ago. And in modern education, almost nothing's been done about it, except give children drugs, which wear out within 3 years. That's really hopeless. I am staggered at the lack of imagination. I'm not criticizing France, it's global. Why aren't we waking up to the fact this is no way to treat our children? To suppress the symptoms without getting into causes, when the methods are available, and it doesn't require allegiance to any religion, or dogma, or metaphysical belief. Nothing. You don't need to call it meditation. Developing attention skills without which you cannot get an education. And you will not lead a successful life. Quite simple, isn't it? Next slide. So the two faculties, how do we achieve or cultivate those qualities? Now drawing directly from the Buddhist tradition, with two faculties that we use and we refine. And it's like working out in a gym. You have muscles, if they're really soft because you haven't used them, right? Use it or lose it, basically, of muscles. Don't use it, the muscle atrophies, right? Don't train your mind, and your mind will become soft like a flabby muscle. Don't train your attention will be ADHD, even if it's not clinically diagnosed as so. So mindfulness. Now this is not the popular mindfulness. It's very, very popular in the whole mindfulness revolution. It's very nice, but it's not what Buddhists have been talking about for the last 25 years. It's a new invention. Useful, but very limited. This is a definition that's been around for about 2,000 years. And it's very useful. It's not just old, it's really useful. It's been useful for about 2,000 years. Mindfulness here, in the classic Buddhist sense of the term, is the faculty of sustaining voluntary attention continuously upon some familiar object, without forgetfulness or distraction. So whether it's baking a cake, preparing lunch for your children before they go to school, whether it's driving, problem solving, creative work, music, art, having a conversation, running a board meeting, anything. Mindfulness in this sense is enormously important. That we can attend to something we're familiar with and sustain the focus without forgetfulness, without distraction. That's mindfulness. Now that's exactly what William James thought could not be trained, because he didn't see any evidence that it could be. But of course he never went to Asia. Well, Buddhists have known since the time of the Buddha this can be trained. And Hindus before the Buddha knew this centuries before the Buddha. This can be trained. But it's like a muscle, you have to work out. So mindfulness, that ability to sustain focus without distraction, without grasping, you have to develop that. But there's another one that's also important. It's not spoken of nearly so often, especially in this modern mindfulness movement. And that is, it's given different translations. I translated it as introspection. It's sometimes called clear comprehension, alertness, vigilance, full awareness. But what it really refers to, again I'm referring to Shantideva, he gives a very clear definition, which I paraphrase here. Introspection is the faculty that enables us, or by which we monitor our own mental processes. In fact, we can also monitor our physiological processes from the first person perspective. We can observe our thoughts, we can observe whether the mind is agitated, calm, excited, dull, clear. Thoughts are occurring, thoughts have subsided. We can observe them. And the faculty by means of which we observe our emotions, our thoughts, desires, memories, fantasies, observe our dreams. Introspection. So introspection can monitor the flow of mindfulness. Recognize when we lose mindfulness, because we're carried away by attention hyperactivity, or we lose mindfulness because we're falling into attention deficit, dullness, lack of clarity. So these two, in the Pali language, sati, sampajanya, these two, the Buddha spoke of those two together countless times. These two, mindfulness and introspection. Mindfulness and introspection. Not one without the other, both together. So the training of attention is really focusing on the cultivation and refinement of those two. And by cultivating those two, you can develop the sense of relaxation, stability, and vividness. So real strategy that can be done, very practical. And you see, it doesn't require any belief at all. You don't have to believe in the Buddha or reincarnation or karma. You don't have to be religious. Don't need to believe in God. But if you believe your mind is just the brain, you probably have no incentive to do it. You'll just be looking for one more drug. Or one more piece of technology. Now they're coming out with more and more little EEG caps, contractions, saying, here's how to develop attention. They have supplements for developing attention. They have Ritalin if your attention is bad. And then we have, I've seen them, I've used one of them, little EEG monitors. They say, this will help you develop attention. We Westerners are always looking for shortcuts. We're always looking for something outside to help us train something inside. And so I've spoken with excellent neuroscientists. These technologies, there's a lot of them. They're making a lot of money. It costs like $200 or $300 for one of these little headsets. I tried it, found it useless. I tried one of the best, found it completely useless. And then I spoke with a neuroscientist friend of mine whose focus, his area of specialization is attention. And I said, do you know any product on the market that is actually effective for giving you valid feedback on your attention and really can help you develop attention skills? He said, not yet. Maybe one day. So people who are so almost brainwashed, not almost, they are brainwashed, to think if you want to change your mind, you have to look outside. The latest breakthrough, the latest app, the latest drug, the latest supplement, the latest something outside, because we've been persuaded, we've been brainwashed that we're helpless. There's nothing you can do. What do you know about the brain? Unless you're a brain scientist, you can't do anything at all. That's propaganda. Actually, it's terrible propaganda. So we go to the next slide. I'll be discussing this slide for the next 5 or 6 days. So if you can come to the retreat, we'll be focusing on this. Practical methods for developing attention skills. You don't have to be Buddhist, you don't have to believe in anything, but you have to believe maybe there's something you could do to refine your attention skills, and maybe that would be beneficial. That's all you have to believe. So I'm quoting somebody from the late 19th, early 20th century, a great Tibetan yogi by the name of Delessert. And he's describing one particular method. In Buddhism, there are dozens of methods for developing attention skills. This is one. Very simple. And he explains the technique. Whatever kinds of mental imagery occurs, be they gentle or violent, subtle or gross, long or short duration, strong or weak, good or bad, whatever comes up, observe their nature and avoid any obsessive evaluation of them as being one thing and not another. In other words, you sit in meditation and you focus your attention single-pointedly on the mind. So not on visual, auditory, and so forth. You're developing cognitive control. And that is not just letting the attention go wherever it wants to. It's like you're training a dog. When your dog wants your dog to go with you, it goes with you and doesn't just run after every cat and every rabbit and every smell. It'd be better to have a mind that's better than an untrained dog. And so, focus your attention on your mind. You can. takes some training, it doesn't come naturally. And whatever thought comes up, you observe it. And a memory comes up, fantasy comes up. Even desires and emotions come up. And you're just taking an interest. It's like watching television. While somebody else has the remote, and they really like to surf channels, channel surfing. I've done that sometimes with my wife. She has control, and she likes to channel surf. So I'm watching, and I change. And I never know what it's changing to, and I never know what's coming up, or how long she'll stay on any one channel. So it's really like watching my mind. And trying to watch it, whether it's an advertisement, or interesting program, or a dull, stupid program, whatever comes up, just be aware of what's coming up. And don't be upset. And don't grab the control. So this is not a matter of altering what's coming up in the mind. There's time for that. It can be useful. But in this practice, you just observe. And you develop that sense of ease. So whatever's coming up, if it's crap, it's crap. If it's virtuous, it's virtuous. If it's silly, whatever it is, say, please, relax. Not being upset, not being happy if some virtuous, nice, happy thought comes up, not being just unhappy or upset if something negative comes up. Just cool, relax. Maintain continuity and do so with care. It's very simple. Not easy, but very simple. And then he concludes here, acting as your own mentor. That is, nobody can do this for you. No technology can do it for you. No teacher can do it for you. You do it yourself or it doesn't happen. Acting as your own mentor, if you can bring the essential point to perfection, really learn this technique, as if you're threading a needle. The afflictions of your own mind stream, like hostility, anxiety, greed, selfishness, and so forth. The afflictions of your own mind stream will be inhibited. That is, they won't happen as much, so calm down. And even when they come up, you will gain the autonomy of not succumbing to them. You'll not be caught in the grip of these thoughts, memories, and so forth. And your mind will be constantly calm and composed. Adhd you develop equipoise. And this is a sound basis for the arising of all samadhis of the stages of generation and completion, which is a bit of technical terminology in Buddhism, saying this is the basis for all more advanced type of practices in Vajrayana Buddhism. Simple practice. We go to the next slide, where I draw an analogy. It's one of my favorite analogies. During the years 2003 to 4, the people were operating the Hubble telescope, which is still in operation, almost retired. They decided to do something, I think, out of sheer curiosity. They looked up into the night sky, and they found one minute region of the night sky that was very dark. It seemed like it had almost nothing in it. So a very low population of stars, whatever. And they got curious, kind of this low-rent district, very low population region of the universe. And they had an idea, why don't we have the Hubble telescope focus on that tiny fraction, 1/10 the diameter of the moon, or about 1/13 millionth of the night sky. So a very tiny speck of the night sky. What would happen if we focused the Hubble telescope on this little tiny dark spot, where there seems to be kind of nothing there, for 1 million seconds? Well, the Hubble telescope is going around the Earth, so this means for 1 million seconds it had to go around 400 times. But each time it got in the right place, then it would be just like an ordinary camera, leave the lens open, and you can do a long exposure. Same. So they did a 1 million second exposure with the Hubble telescope, at that time the best telescope around, to see what would they see. I think they're just curious. What will we see if we have a 1 million second exposure of this relatively empty area of space? And of course, they needed to analyze all the data, compile it all, compress it all into one image. The image came out, and in that tiny, tiny speck of space, they observed 10,000 galaxies. And one galaxy has anywhere from 100 billion to 1 trillion stars. 10,000 of those. And that's where there's very little happening. I love that. It just blows the mind. Gives some sense of how incredibly vast this universe is. Well, this is what we're really good at. That is we, that is the scientific community. This is 400 years after Galileo. From his 8-power telescope to the Hubble telescope. Even a century ago, astronomers didn't know whether there were any other galaxies in the universe. The only one they knew of was the Milky Way. And now they estimate something like 100 billion galaxies. And 10,000 in that little tiny speck. That's in 1 century. This is a celebration. This is fantastic. This is because the scientists, astronomers in particular, have developed outstanding samadhi, looking outwards. And the samadhi is the telescope. It's stable and it's clear. Right? Extremely high focus, high resolution, and extremely stable. 1 million seconds on that tiny speck, that's stability. And that's what they discovered. And of course, many, many people discovered. So in modern science, we've externalized samadhi into the instruments of technology. Really, it's fantastic. And all the beneficiaries of that. Cell phones and so on. But it raises the question, and that is, what if you spent 1 million seconds focusing single-pointedly with very, very high resolution, and you focused on the space of your mind? That space where the little stars of thoughts and memories and images and so forth, the nebula of emotions, the galaxies of thoughts and images. What would happen if you spent 1 million seconds focused continuously on your mind with stability and clarity? If you've ever observed your mind, just sat quietly, sometimes it may seem like that little dark spot. Like right now, if you try to do it just for a couple of seconds. You may not see much. The dark spot of the mind, where it just seems like it's quiet, it's empty. What if you focus on that dark spot for 1 million seconds? And has anybody ever done that? Gone into a meditation hut or a cave and spent 1 million seconds focusing a single point on the space of the mind? How about 5,000, 10,000? Has anybody ever done it? In the West? Western scientists? The answer is no. How about India, Tibet, Mongolia, Nepal, Bhutan? Oh yeah, they've been doing it for centuries. In other words, the question has been posed and the question has been answered. They've done the research and we haven't. We, modern Westerners, Eurocentric civilization, have not done that experiment. We've done the Hubble, that's good, because that's what we're good at. But introspection is something we're... Neanderthals, we haven't even begun. We've not even begun. So we are a pre-contemplative civilization. As Tibet 100 years ago was pre-scientific. In Tibet, the best technology they had was bridges and prayer wheels. That was it. And they didn't keep on coming up with prayer wheel 202 and 3.0 and 4.0, you know, because it goes faster and faster. Prayer wheel worked, they're happy. So Tibetans, I'm not saying it's an ideal society, it wasn't. But Tibet, traditional Tibet was very content with the level of technology they had, because it was good enough. They didn't need wheeled vehicles because their roads were so poor, the wheeled vehicle would have been useless. And they liked riding their yaks and horses. And they weren't in a hurry. So they had no use really for our technology. So they were very satisfied externally. But then here is a culture unique on the planet that has 6,000 monasteries for 6 million people. That's 1 monastery for every 1,000 people. How many people in Paris? What's the population? 8 million? 10? Around 8 or 10 million people. Okay, that's good. So you should have 8,000, 10,000 monasteries in Paris. if you were like Tibet. One monastery for every 1,000 persons. That was their emphasis. That was the emphasis. Anyone wanted to become a monk or nun or a yogi, you're covered. You're taken care of. That was a civilized society. They knew what was important. They knew what was really beneficial. Technology is very beneficial, but also we also know it so well. It's double-edged. Because it's the same technology that's destroying the planet, isn't it? The global warming, it's because of our technology. Technology is not bad, but we're using it stupid. The depletion of natural resources, we're doing that with technology. The depletion of half the fish in the ocean now are gone. That's because our technology is really good at wiping out fish. The depletion of 50% of the wildlife on the planet over the last 40 years. That's because we're more efficient in killing animals. So our advanced technology is actually destroying the planet. Nothing wrong with the technology. It's the mind using the technology. So what happens? This is now a bit advanced, but it's good to expand. Just to expand our vision of the universe and know there are 100 billion galaxies. Kind of good. It expands the mind. What happens if some yogi spends 5,000 or 10,000 hours exploring the mind? Much more than 1,000,000 seconds. 10,000 hours, 15,000. What happens? What do they see when they do that for 12, 14, 16 hours a day? What do they see? It's not speculation, they actually have reported. Here's one from the 17th century, one of the greatest lamas in the Gelugpa tradition, of Tibetan Buddhism, Benchen Losang Chukyi Gyaltsen. And he describes, he says, the nature of meditative equipoise, when you settle into this state, is not obscured by anything, but is limpid and clear, lucid and clear. Not established as anything physical. The mind, the space of the mind, has no physical attributes whatsoever. It is a clear vacuity like space, allowing anything to arise in the space of the mind. It is vividly awake. Such is the nature of the mind. This is superbly witnessed with direct perception, like Galileo looking through a telescope. He's not imagining, he's not speculating, not doing mathematics, he's observing in a very refined way. This is superbly witnessed with direct perception, and yet it cannot be grasped as this or demonstrated with words. And that is, if you haven't experienced it, then words won't help, because you won't know what the words are referring to. You have to do it. Like if you've never tasted anything sweet. Imagine, you've never, you lived in a very deprived family, and parents said, sweet is bad, sweet is evil. You've never tasted anything sweet. And I'm sitting here eating some fine French chocolate. And I know exactly what it tastes like. I tasted Belgian and German and Swiss and American and English. This is some very fine French chocolate. Connoisseur. French chocolate. And I want to describe to you. I want to describe the taste. This is how this French chocolate is a little bit different from the German and Swiss. I know exactly how the difference is. And I want to explain it to you. What are my chances of your understanding what French chocolate tastes like and how it's different from German chocolate, English chocolate? Zero chance. It's not because it's mystical. It's just that you don't have the experience. And I do, and I have the words, but you don't know what the words refer to. And the same is true of meditation. It's not mystical, it's not esoteric, it's just if you haven't meditated, you're not going to know what it's like to meditate. That's it. If you're colorblind, you won't know what red looks like. That's just it. Whatever arises, rest loosely, without grasping. That's a phrase, an aphorism in Tibet. And Benchen Rinpoche says, nowadays, for the most part, contemplatives of Tibet uniformly proclaim this as practical advice for achieving enlightenment. They say, that's it, that's Mahamudra, that's Lobchen. However, Chukyi Gyaltsen, he's referring to himself, of course, he says, I declare this to be an exceptionally skillful method for novices to achieve mental stability and to identify the relative nature of the mind. And that no, this is not the pinnacle of meditation, this is not a single method for achieving enlightenment. But it can help you actually realize the nature of mind on a relative level. And that's something that all of psychology has not yet done. Psychologists can't even define consciousness. They can't measure it. They don't know what causes it. They don't know what it does. And they don't know how it interacts with the brain. In other words, pretty much uniform ignorance. And they're simply assuming that consciousness is produced by the brain. There's actually no evidence of that at all. It's groupthink. It's like mass hypnosis. To think that the mind is nothing more than brain function. It's like mass hypnosis. It's amazing. Because I've studied this for 25 years now. And I'm looking for the evidence. You people are so, the materialists are so confident, like everybody knows that the mind is nothing more than a function of the brain. And yet there's never been an experiment that demonstrates that. Amazing. And nowadays in the popular media, and I don't read French, but I imagine it's the same as in British and American press, which I read regularly. The word mind and brain now are used interchangeably. As if some time ago there was a discovery that in fact the mind is nothing other than the brain. As if, oh, we made that discovery, yes, some time ago. And now everybody knows, the mind is the brain. Train your brain. The brain knows this. The brain sees that. The brain remembers this. These images occur in the brain. And yet that experiment was never done. It's just an empty belief with no evidence behind it. I find that's utterly amazing. That so many intelligent people can accept something with blind faith. Just because other people say it. It's like one dog barks and a whole bunch of dogs bark. There's actually no evidence at all that the mind is the brain. Zero. And yet the two words are being used interchangeably. And during the last 10, 15 years, that's when it's really happened. Now it's brain, 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 as if we all made a discovery 15 years ago. The mind is the brain, except for nobody ever made that discovery. That's not science, that's nonsense. Or pseudoscience. And it permeates the media, and permeates a lot of scientific thinking. So next slide, and we're almost finished. So I cite Veda Lingua once again, the essential nature of the mind. No, I'm sorry, there's a mistake here, my mistake. This is not Veda Lingua, it's another one, it's Dujom Lingua. I will correct this slide. It's Dujom Lingua. He was also lived in the 19th century, another great Tibetan master of the Dzogchen, or Great Perfection School. They both were, but this is my little typo. Dujom Lingua. It's a rather long quote, I'll read it slowly. He's describing the same method, and what happens when you spend that 5,000, 10,000 hours doing this practice. Here's what it's like, because they've done it thousands of times. The rope of mindfulness and firmly maintained attention is dissolved by the power of meditative experiences until finally the ordinary mind of an ordinary being disappears, as it were. The mind just dissolves away into space and awareness. Consequently, compulsive thinking, all the wandering thoughts and so forth, subsides. And roving thoughts vanish into the space of awareness. One then slips into the vacuity of the substrate, which is simply the space of the mind, in which oneself, others, and objects disappear. You go into a sheer absence of appearances, as if you were deep asleep, in dreamless sleep, and wide awake. It's called lucid, dreamless sleep, where you're deep asleep, and while you're deep asleep, you're awake. You know it. And you're vividly awake, and aware of almost nothing, except for sheer vacuity, because all of your five senses have shut down. By clinging to the experiences of vacuity and clarity, or luminosity, while looking inwards, the appearances of oneself, others, and objects vanish. And that consciousness that lingers is not your mind. This is woman, man, old, young, French, German. It's not that mind. That mind is dissolved. And all that remains is just a flow of luminosity, of cognizance, that we call all the substrate consciousness, the Galupas call subtle continuum of mental consciousness. The same. There's nothing philosophical to refute here. This is just what you experience. People call it different names. Some teachers say the substrate to which one descends, that sheer vacuity, is freedom from conceptual elaboration, which is actually a very high state of insight in the Mahamudra tradition, or the one taste, which is another high state. While others say this state is ethically neutral. In other words, people give all kinds of big names to this state. Whatever they call it, it's not that. It's not that. Whatever they call it, the truth is that one has come to the essential nature of the mind. And he's saying the same thing as the previous author. You realize the essential nature of the mind. Just the nature of consciousness. You now have realized the relative nature of consciousness. And its nature is luminous and cognizant. And consciousness is by nature not human. It has no gender, it's not male or female, old or young. Just like crystal clear water, uncolored, unflavored. Simply a flow of consciousness. So the next slide, I think maybe that's almost finished. So. I skip one? No, that's it. Okay. Looks like we're on the last slide. And it's also good, it's almost 9. That substrate consciousness, this is a term used in Dzogchen. So if there are Buddhist scholars in the room, you will know that the term alai vijnana, or foundation consciousness, storehouse consciousness, goes by different translations. I translate it as substrate consciousness. In the Dzogchen tradition, I will say as a scholar, it is completely compatible with Prasangika Madhyamaka, with the most refined Buddhist philosophy that was ever devised. Completely compatible. There's nothing to refute. And it's actually the same as is also called subtle continuum mental consciousness. And that's what you're realizing. Well, that's interesting. But it turns out to be an enormously important discovery, which has not yet been made by modern psychology, not even close. And that is when your coarse mind, your ordinary mind, your psyche, which is conditioned by gender and ethnicity and language and personal history and so forth, when that dissolves, it melts away and it's distilled down to this subtle continuum of mental consciousness, which is not even human, let alone male, female, so on. This is a dimension of consciousness that is not contingent upon the brain. Now, that easily sounds like a religious dogma, belief, metaphysical speculation. But in fact, it's not. It's a scientific conclusion. Not made by modern scientists, because they don't know how to do any of this. We're primitive, we're Neanderthal. We're just studying the mind by studying behavior and brain. Now, these people actually study the mind for centuries. But when I say that this is a dimension or continuum of consciousness that's not contingent upon or dependent upon the brain, does not emerge from the brain, and does not cease when the brain ceases. It's an empirical observation, and not just a religious belief. How? Slip into that dimension of consciousness, and you can retrieve valid, accurate, detailed memories from before this life. And it can be confirmed whether they're accurate or not. It's not that hard. Whether you're just fantasizing and making it all up, you're just, having a psychotic fit. You can check if you remember being somebody in a past life, and you have accurate, detailed, specific information about that previous life. Somebody can check it out to see whether what you're saying is true or not. In other words, it's empirically verifiable. And it's been empirically verified thousands of times. I myself am more confident of this truth than I ever am of gravity. That doesn't mean you should be. It doesn't mean you should take me as an authority. I'm just telling you from my perspective. That this is one of the most well-established scientific truths about the nature of consciousness that's ever been established. And it's not just the Buddhists. It's Hindus. They made the same discovery. And Taoists, widespread belief in reincarnation in Taoism. And in the Sufi tradition, even though it's illegal to believe it, there are many Sufis that believe it. Muslim contemplatives. In the Jewish tradition, in the Kabbalah, it's mainstream. Believe in reincarnation, it's mainstream. And in various shamanic traditions around the world, the Inuit up in Alaska, very widespread. In shamanic traditions all over the world, it's very widespread. And that's cutting across all the different traditions. Jewish, early Christians, widespread belief in reincarnation for the first few centuries. And one of the church fathers, Origen, taught explicitly reincarnation. He said, we must be perfect as the Father in heaven is perfect, and one life is too short. Therefore, we need multiple lifetimes. So he's a church father. He's still a church father. And he taught reincarnation in the 3rd century. But then a bunch of politicians got together, and they outlawed belief in reincarnation. I think it's wonderful. It's like outlawing belief in planets. But religious people have been doing that. It's one of the most psychotic things that people do. Outlaw something that's true. So, it's not enough to believe. Lama Zopa is the spiritual director of this center. He was asked once, is it necessary to believe in reincarnation in order to become enlightened? And they said, no. You have to know reincarnation. Not just believe it. Believing is cheap. It's easy. Just believe it, you know. Believe it. Big deal. Well, happily, there's now scientific evidence from the scientific community. 40 years of it, very rigorous, sophisticated, good research. I know that people do it. A major center for this is the University of Virginia in the United States. Ian Stevenson, Jim Tucker. I know Jim Tucker, and I've read Ian Stevenson's work carefully. It's good science. And they examined thousands and thousands of children worldwide who allegedly have past life recall. They see that 99% of them they can throw out, and 1% they can't. Children have accurate, detailed memories of information about past life, and they have no possible access to that information, unless they actually have that as their memory. That research has been almost uniformly ignored in the scientific community. It's amazing. And then there's near-death experience, research in that field. Just last year, a very large study was concluded with 2,000 subjects. People who had cardiac arrest in the UK, United States, and Australia. Which means that on the operating table, they are temporarily dead for a matter of 2 or 3 minutes, and then, with the wonders of modern medicine, they're brought back. So 2,000 people had near-death experiences, or post-death experiences, because the brain completely stops. 40% of these 2,000 people, in the largest study done by a large team of scientists, published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal, 40% of them had recall of continuity of consciousness after brain death. 40%. And one of them, an Englishman, after his brain was dead, that is, non-functioning, he had an out-of-body experience, and while having an out-of-body experience, while his brain was dead, he was dead, he observed what was taking place in the operating room. He watched people, and he heard what they were saying. He was brought back to life, and he reported what he saw and heard while his brain was dead, and everything he said was true. And that was reported by the scientific researcher who was in charge of the whole study. And that's science. That's not Buddhism, Hindu, that's science. And that also is being largely ignored by the scientific community. And so I feel this is an enormously fertile area for cross-cultural, interdisciplinary research to make one of the most important scientific discoveries in the history of humanity. And we're very close to doing it. We bring together not only scientists, but bring together highly accomplished yogis and let them collaborate together, drawing from the depth of contemplative insight and methods for exploring consciousness, and drawing on the rigor, the sophistication, the objectivity, the skepticism of the scientific community. Let them come together. And if the continuity of consciousness before conception and after death, if that's true, it should become a public truth, like the existence of electrons, viruses, gravity, and so forth, that we all believe in. And yet how many of us have ever seen a virus, or ever seen gravity, or an electron? And we all believe it. It's public knowledge. Only a few people know it's true, and the rest of us all believe it's true, or we're just ignorant. My strong feeling is that the continuity of this subtle continuum of consciousness that you can access by achieving shamatha through meditative practices of developing attention skills That's enough. You don't have to be Buddhist. You don't have to be Buddhist. Any more than Galileo had to be Christian in order to discover the moons of Jupiter. And then many other people discovered it. And now we all know Jupiter has moons. My strong feeling is that this is such an enormously important, staggeringly important reality of the nature of consciousness. It shouldn't be the sole possession of Buddhists or Hindus or other religious people. It should be public. It's not only physicists who believe in electrons. Everybody believes in electrons. And so if this is true, everybody should know it's true. And if it's false, then we should all know it's false. One way or another. It can't be maybe. It's yes or no. So that would be something of the culmination of attentional intelligence. To know who we are, know how long we'll be here, and what the future really holds. Is death oblivion, or simply the ending of one chapter, the beginning of others? We should know that, and not simply have it as a religious belief. Religious belief's too cheap, too easy. Doesn't transform. So that's it. I hope that was useful. So it's quite late, but maybe one really juicy question. We'll call it a night. Anybody have any burning questions? Or not? Let's get on. Anything coming up?
Il l'a posé en français, ça pose pas de problème.
D'accord. Have a good night. Sweet dreams. And I'll see some of you perhaps for the next 6 days. This is, and not just talking.